Okay, we are on 89B1 at the top of the second column. So we're talking about if a woman comes with a get but no ksuva, what's she able to collect? If she comes with a ksuva without a get, what's she able to collect? So just because she has a ksuva doesn't mean that she's gets her ksuva, because the halacha is the ksuva is an insurance uh for the wife that the husband won't get angry and suddenly divorce her. So she has this star that the husband will have to pay a lot of money, so it'll cool him down a little bit if he gets angry. So she has to have the ksuva the whole time. There's a halacha. If she loses her ksuva, they have to separate until they write a new replacement ksuva. So the fact that she has a ksuva doesn't mean she gets to collect it. She has to have a get that she got divorced and the ksuva, and then she could collect it. Or she has to bring evidence that her husband died and the ksuva, and then she would get the ksuva. So so the Gemara first tried to say this shows that we write a receipt. A shover is like a receipt. So if the husband would have paid so if the wife has a get but no ksuva, what does that mean? It means she's divorced and she probably paid the ksuva already because went to Beis Din, had the ksuva, and the husband says, okay, I owe her this money, I pay the money. So then once she gets the money, she gives the ksuva to the husband and he's going to rip it up out of, defense for himself. So she won't use it a second time to collect again. That's normally what happens. And then this was a case, I think we said that she said I lost the ksuva and he agreed that he didn't pay it. So if she has the get, so it's a machlokus, and we say, does he only pay the ikr ksuva? If she has a get, he'll only pay the ikr ksuva, the 200 or the 100 zuz, and he doesn't have to pay any of the tosefes unless she can produce the document.
Look, more like taking odd cases.
Yeah.
But again, I have to say that in general, wouldn't a lot of what you're saying be common knowledge? Be common knowledge if the woman was married or got a get or or the husband died.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these weren't cities of a million people like
Right.
nowadays.
Right.
This
Think
would have been common knowledge.
correct. Things would have been common knowledge, and we know from Megillus Rus the Yibum and the acquiring the field that Boaz was doing with Rus. He went to the city. The Chalitza certainly has to be Bishar. So yeah, it was common knowledge. Um, Tosfos mentions in Sanhedrin and maybe some other places also. If a get happens, it's common knowledge. The word that Tosfos says is there's a call, there's a sound. People know that a get took place. So yeah, but let's say she goes from Tiberia to Tzvas, she goes from city to city. But the Gemara is going to talk about this and try to collect it multiple times, maybe, and say, "Oh, here's my get, but I lost my ksuba. I want to collect again."
So even in those days, wouldn't the
I don't know how much it went from city to city. I don't know.
yeah, but wouldn't the rabbis in one town talk to the rabbis in another town and find out in those days? I don't know.
If someone would come to Beis Din with a star, they wouldn't start investigating from other places.
Uh,
If you have a star, normally that would be right away. So, um, and they probably didn't really have, even if they would have people going back and forth,
like nowadays,
they usually,
you had certain rabbis not talking to other rabbis. Okay, all right.
no, I don't.
Because by the way, that's the way it is in Israel now. You know, I was telling me, you pick where you're gonna go for to get married. And some people pick different towns on purpose.
Okay,
Required marriage certificate.
they do. But I mean, so you could go to the Rav of that city, and it'll get official. There are some rabbis who will do weddings, and they're not authorized to. There are people like that. Uh, I mean, I know a guy I didn't even know he was a rabbi, and then he was doing one of those. But I mean, he was this particular guy. I mean, I don't know him well. I know who he is from the time I was in Israel. And I didn't know he had smicha or anything, but he was one of the people who were upset. See, it's they're upset about that the chief rabbinate runs the gerus and runs the wedding. So to protest that, they do that. Here, there were so many problems. This person said they had a gerus. The rabbi who was Megayer them, who they claims has no recollection of it. So here, having a central thing sounds like a good thing from here. There, who they have it, they think not having a central thing is better. It's the classic case. I think if the grass is greener on the other side, the way that they do it is better. So in Israel, they think not having a central thing is better. I think having a central thing is. I mean, obviously, having a central thing to make bureaucracy, there's pros and cons. But the fact that if some rabbis are doing something and they don't have standards and they don't even keep good records, that's a horrible, horrible thing. And we've had many cases like that we had to fix things because of things like that.
Do you think it was similar in other times?
No, but the thing is that if you would go from place to place, you would need to bring, you would have to have witnesses, and there's a lot of gemaras about that. So like if a family comes from somewhere else, if a kid is following the woman, so there's a chazaka that kid is her kid, that's her child. So the Gemara says, so if because of the chazaka, if that kid would later grow up and have relations with his mother, we would put him to death because of the chazaka is strong enough to kill, even though we don't know 100%, because a kid could follow a babysitter also, but because they came as a family and the boy is following her like a kid follows a mother, so that's a chazaka to say that that's his mother, and we kill on that. In other cases, or a lot of cases in the end of Yevamos, the last two chapters, about if someone dies and we don't know, the husband went away and no one found. We heard that the ship crashed at sea, sunk at sea. She's a gona. What kind of evidence is good enough to allow her to remarry? So I mean, there are a lot of cases about that, and now with communications, the way the communications are, it makes things a lot less uncertain. But every couple of years you see a news story about someone who was missing for years and presumed dead. The court declared him dead. They just disappeared and started a new life somewhere with someone else's name, and they're still alive. And that's for the same reason that these Aguna cases, we need a certain level of knowing what happened to them before we could declare them dead. It's the same reason, because we're worried that they are alive and they just decided to disappear. I saw another story like that a couple months ago. I don't remember, or a month or two ago, but yeah. So if a based in, let's say in those days, Tzipori was a city, and Tzfat and Tiberia. I don't know how big Tzfat was then, but if someone came in one basin, they wouldn't go to look at the other, but they did in the area to find out if they had ever judged that case or not. I mean, there's a mission. I think it's at the end, near the end of Kedushin. It talks about people in the register in the ancient, uh, in the old record based in records of Tzipori. So they had a certain record, and they said if people were listed in that, that they were miyuchas and they could marry a Kohen, and if there's a Kohen, they could serve in the Beis Hamikdash. But for the most part, if someone comes with a star, based in could act on it right away. If Adam came, it seems if Adam would come and say, we saw Shmerel being Machal Shabbos, they would they would judge the case that day. But I mean, they have to wait. If it's a capital case, they'd have to wait till the next day to make the psak. But in a monetary case, they could judge it the same day. So So we said, according to Shmuel, they would write a shover, a receipt, to show that this ksuva had been paid off. She can't collect it again. So if she doesn't have a ksuva, she should have a shover. She should have her receipt. And Rav, we said, according to Rav, they didn't necessarily. Rav wasn't so big on writing a receipt. So that's what we were talking at the end of last time. A machlok between Rav and Shmuel. So at the 89b1 on the second column, so in the Gemara, it's about 13 lines from the top, right after the word bepruzbel. So Amri le Rav Kahana Ravasi le Rav. Rav Kahana and Ravasi said to Rav, whose opinion was that you don't necessarily need to write a receipt. L'didachta amar get gova ikar, according to you, that is, as long as the woman produces a get, she's able to collect the 200 or the 100 zuz of the ksuva, but not the extra. If she's a widow from marriage, how could she collect? She doesn't have a get with which to collect. So, be'edei misa, you must have to hold that she has to bring witnesses that her husband died, and so with the witnesses saying that she died, so she could collect the ksuva. So v'leichosh dilma gersha. So maybe, so we could, let's say that the we could believe the witnesses that her husband died, but maybe their husband had divorced her before he died. So without a get, how could we allow her to collect? And so maybe she had divorced her before, and right now she's holding that in reserve. And right now she's using the Eidei Misa, the Eidim that say that her husband had died, to collect the get. And then a little bit down the road, she's going to produce the ksuva to get the estate to pay her ksuva a second time. And according to you, don't write a receipt. So how do we know this? So biyosheves tachas ba'ela. So this is a case where they were still living together at the time where the husband died. So they clearly weren't divorced. So v'dilma samach lemisa gersha. Maybe he divorced her right before he died. Now, to us, that sounds like a crazy case. But in the time of the Mishnah and Gemara, there were certain situations where that was a common thing to do. If they didn't have kids and she was going to have to do yibum, so in that case, he would give her a divorce right before he died, so that she wouldn't have to do yibum. Maybe she knew that they didn't get along, his brother and her, or maybe he was out of town, or maybe they didn't know where he was, and she would have to wait. And so to reduce the uncertainty, they would give a get. So sometimes there were cases where right before he died, when he was sick, he would give her a get to save her from having to do yibum or chalitza. So the fact that to give a divorce right before the marriage isn't as crazy as it might sound nowadays. So they asked Rav, maybe he divorced her right before he died. So if she brings Eidei Misa, we'll give her the ksuva now. And then when she brings the ksuva later, she's going to double collect, at least according to you, the 200 zuz or the 100 zuz of her ksuva. So iu huda afsed an afshe. So Rav says if that was he chose to do, to divorce her right before he died, so the loss that that his estate is going to pay the ksuva twice is his own problem. So one thing I should be clear about, the fact that the Gemara here said almanamin and asuin, so we know that so we mentioned last time that it was there's a machlokus Rav and Shmuel depending on what was the Mishnah talking about. One of the possibilities that the Mishnah was talking about was in a place that they didn't write a ksuva because the Beis Din, there's a Tanai Beis Din, there's an automatic requirement that the married woman gets a ksuva, even if there was no written ksuva. We know that he had to obligate himself to pay a ksuva, at least the 200 or the 100 zuz. So even when she doesn't produce a get, we know that there is a ksuva obligation. I think this is going to play a role. So in the next Gemara, so that's why I want to mention now. I should have mentioned it at the beginning of the line. So if she didn't have a ksuva, because it's a place they didn't write a ksuva because we knew it was automatic, maybe he wrote a ksuva. We were talking about that last week, those possibilities. So Rav said, if he divorced her right before he died, so Eidei Mis, if she brings witnesses that he died, she'll collect, and she'll bring the get. She gets to collect the get. Rav says that he brought the loss upon himself. Almana mina erisin b'may gavya. Now, what about an almana from erisin? He gave the ring, but they never had chuppah. So can she collect? The Eidei Misa. So she could collect if there were witnesses that she died. V'leichosh dilma gersha. But maybe we should worry that they got divorced before he died. Umafka gita v'gavya, and she's gonna give her get. She's saving her get for another day to pull this stunt to collect again. So how did we answer it if there was nesuin? we said we know that they were living together until he died. But here, if it's Eris and they weren't living together yet because the chuppah didn't take place. So according to you, Rav, you should concede that she shouldn't be able to collect just because there are Eidei Misa. So Ela b'makom delafshar. So Rav says no. So it's different when there's no other possibility. Kasvina and Shover. When there's no other choice, we do write a receipt that her ksuva was paid. So the receipt would go to the heirs of her husband. So if she would ever produce try to pull this stunt that she says, I have a get, or she comes with witnesses and says, I have witnesses that my husband died, I want to pay the ksuba, the husband's heirs will have a document that Basin gave him called a shover or a receipt that says, we already paid it. The lo temahachi, because if we don't say, if we say that we never write a receipt, ede misa gufayhu, nechus doma mafka ede misa b'hai beidina v'gavya, v'hadar mafka b'veidina achrina v'gavya. This is what Marty was asking. If you could always collect just with Adam that they died, let her go to Basin in City 1 and collect. Then she'll bring the witnesses to a different basin in another city and collect again. So when we have no other alternative, even Rav will agree that we will write a receipt. Amar le Markashisha breder Rav Chisda Rav Ashi. Markashisha, the son of Rav Chisda, said to Rav Ashi. So this I mentioned on yesterday morning in Marty and Jeff after davening. So Rashi says that Rav Chisda had two sons. I think their both names were Abba. Where is it? Yeah, Rav Chisda had two sons. They had the same name. So the big one they called Mar Kashisha, the older one, Ulitzar Karnlo Mar Yanuka. And the other one they called the younger one. So Tosfos in Bava Basra, the Bach brings down here, that actually they weren't necessarily so close in age, but the younger one was called Bar Kashisha, the older son, even though he was younger, because the father was older at the time that he was born. And the one who they called the younger one, he was really older, but the father was younger when he was born. So I mentioned yesterday in regard to Yosef in this week's parsha, Ben Zakunim, that for Ben Zakunim means that he was born when the father was older. So according to Tosfos' explanation, the Ben Zakunim would be Bar Kashisha, because it's when the father was older. And then I mentioned yesterday in the Vort that one time when it was, I think, Rav Aaron's yortzeit, Rav Moshe was talking about a difference between his father and his uncle. He said that they had different ways of learning, and he was hypothesizing maybe because his uncle learned from his grandfather. So Rav Yashaber learned from his father, Rav Moshe, when Rav Moshe was younger. It could have been that he was a more, I shouldn't say aggressive, but a more adventurous, giving more possibilities, more in a more adventurous way. Rav Aaron learned from his father when his father was older, so maybe it was more of a mature, settled outlook, and that's why Rav Aaron would paskin almost based on almost any svara he said in shir. He'd be willing to paskin a shaila based on that, whereas Rav Yashaber would give bigger chedushim that we wouldn't really want to paskin off of because they were a little bit more revolutionary than we could. So once in the summer of '67, their mother had passed away and their brother, and Rav Yashaber's wife had also passed away at that time. So both of them were learning the same Gemaras about Avelos, about mourning that summer. So there was someone here at HTC with Rav Moshe and Rav Aaron, and he had a brother at YU who was learning with Rav Yashaber. So he sent his notes from Rav Yashaber's share to his brother here, and they showed it to Rav Moshe. And on a certain Tosfos, Rav Yashaber gave three possibilities, and Rav Aaron only gave one possibility. So Rav Moshe went in to his father, and he said, Abba, Uncle Beryl gave three explanations in Tosfos. You only gave one. Why not? Why did you give three? So he said Rav thought for a minute, and he said, okay, the two other explanations that my brother gave were this and that, which it was, but he said, but you can't really say that. So it's not that you couldn't say it. You could say that, but in regard to it being related to like psak, this is the way maybe Ramosha didn't say it over this way. This is the way I understood him saying it over. That those other two possibilities that Rav Yashaber mentioned, they're Shivim Panim LaTorah, but it was too far removed from a way that we would paskin based on. That's right. So calling the sons Bar Kashisha and Bar Yanuka, when the father was younger and the father was older, it could have been different ways that their father had influenced them. Rav Chisda influenced them with different kochos or different perspectives based on the fact that he was younger when the older son was born, and that he was older when the when the younger son was born, and that would be assuming that they weren't so close together in age. Rav Arnon and Rav Yashaber were 14 years apart, and Rav Yasha and when Rav Yashaber was a boy, I think part of the time was before Rav Moshe even had his own rabbinic job yet, but part of the time he did. And when Rav Arnon learned with his father, he was 13, and it was in New York for most of the time. I mean, he learned a little bit with his father before he was 12, before his father went, and then they were separated for a year and a half until they got the visas to come. But it's with that, it's easy to see why Moshe, the grandfather, was a little different between the time he learned with Rav Yashaber and the time he learned with Rav Ar. So it's just an interesting way to understand the Mar Kashisha and Mar Yanuka, and also because we have Ben Zakunim in this week's parsha. So Mar Kashisha, the son of Rav Chisda, said to Rav Ashi, Almana min Erisin min Ksuva. How do we know that an almana from Erisin has a ksuva? We just brought a proof that from a question that we asked Rav, we had to make Rav concede that there's certain times that you have to write a shover. But that was based on a case where we had an almana mina from Erison before chuppah that she would bring Eidei Misa, witnesses that her husband died, and she's going to collect a ksuva. But how do we know that such a woman actually gets a ksuva even if there's no written ksuva? Because if you think about it, if she hasn't left her father's house completely yet because she's still living there because she didn't have a chuppah, it's possible that, if her husband divorces her, she never was fully married yet. So maybe she doesn't need this security blanket of the ksuva to protect herself in case of divorce or widowhood. Whereas in case of divorce from after chuppah, full chuppah, she would need that security blanket. So how do we know what's the proof that a widow from Erison has a ksuva as a Tanai Beistin? So, if it's from a Mishnah, which is in an earlier pair, if she became widowed or divorced, whether it was from Erison or whether it was from Nesuin is again the chuppah, goves hakol. She collects everything, her ksuva, the 200 zuz, and the extra, the tosefes. Dilma de kasavla. Maybe that Mishnah is only a case where he wrote her ksuva, and so in that case where he actually wrote her ksuva, she has a ksuva. But if he didn't write her ksuva because they never had chuppah yet, maybe the Beis Din doesn't decree that there's a ksuva even though he didn't write it. And if you want to say that that Mishnah is only telling us that she gets the whole ksuva, including the tosefes, if he had written the ksuva, what's the chiddush? Why is that? Why does the Mishnah need to tell us that? Nafukim to Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, to exclude the opinion of Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, the Amar Shlo Kasavla Amanasha Hu Konsa, because Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah says that she doesn't get the whole ksuva. He only wrote her a big amount with a big tosefes because he wanted to marry her. If something happened and the marriage never got completed, the chuppah never took place, he's not going to give her the 200 plus, 500,000 shekel because he liked her. He wrote her a tosefes of 500,000 shekel because he wanted to marry her. If he died first or they got divorced first, whatever reason, he didn't want to give her that because he only was going to give her that because he wanted to be married to her if the chuppah never took place. So, so clearly in that case, there he wrote an additional thing, according to Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah. So Deganami, we could also learn from a close reading of the Mishnah that she gets from that Mishnah that she collects ksuva even from Erison because it says Gova as Hakol, she collects everything. If we're talking about a case where he wrote her ksuva, Mishum Hachi Gova Sakol, she only collects everything because he wrote it down. That makes sense. But if the Mishnah is talking about a case where he didn't write anything to her, my Gova Sakol, what's the everything that's talking to? Mana Masayim Hud Isle. It's only going to be 100 zuz if she wasn't a basula and 200 if she was. So what's the call? So he's saying there is no proof. There should be no proof that a woman before chuppah has a ksuva unless it was explicitly written. So we had asked against to try to force Rav to say that Rav's opinion is we write a receipt from a situation where they would get divorced from Erison. So Markashisha is asking, well, how do we actually know that there is a ksuva without writing it? We could say that the only time there's a ksuva before Erison is if you wrote it. And the whole question against Rav would only be in a case where you didn't write a ksuva and she gets to collect because Based in said, whenever you get married, you have to pay either the 200 zuz or the 100 zuz. The element of Tani Rav Chia bar Avin. So maybe we have another source for that a woman before chuppah from Erison has a get, has a ksuva from a statement of Rav Chia bar Avin. Ishto Arusa, if a man was married, I mean, he gave her the ring, he gave her a kasef, but they didn't do chuppah yet. They didn't have nesuin yet. Lo onain. He doesn't have the status of onain. That meaning before she gets buried, he's not out. He's exempt from doing all all positive commandments. Below mitamela, and if he's a kohen, he does not become tame for her because since they're not fully married yet, he can't become tame for her. V'chein. And similarly, if the husband dies, he lo onenes, she doesn't become an onenes for him, b'lamitama lo, and she doesn't have to become tame for him. It's not a prohibition for a female Kohen or Bas Kohen to become tame, but I guess because of the symmetry of the Mishnah, it mentions this case. This is what Rashi says. So that particular phrase of the Mishnah is not that important. Mesa in Yorsha, if she dies, he does not inherit her. Mace, but if he died, Gova Ksuva, so she gets to collect her Ksuva. So from that Mishnah, and that Mishnah is and it's not Rav Chia bar Avin is an Amora, but he gave the statement. It's earlier on Daf Nun Gimel, and it's in Yevamos and Bab Metzia. So you can't bring a proof that there's an automatic ksuva that he says that she collects a ksuva dilma the kasavla. Maybe that statement is also the case where he specifically wrote a ksuva. And if you say that case is where he wrote, if it was a case where he wrote the ksuva, what's the chiddush? Mesa and Yarsha Itzurchale. We could say that he had to bring that if she dies, that he doesn't inherit her. That's what the mission needs to teach us. So we don't have any source that someone from Erison actually has an automatic suva from a Tanai Basin without it being written by the husband. So maybe there's no problem for Rav. There's no reason that Rav would have to concede that in any case you have to write a receipt, a shover. Amar le Rav Nachman le Rav Huna. Rav Nachman said to Rav Huna, Rav Amar Git Gova Iker. According to Rav, that if she produces a get, she gets to collect the main part of her ksuva, the 100 or the 200. Why aren't we worried that she's going to go from this based in and collect, and then another time she's going to go to a different base in a different city and collect it again? And if we say that we have to rip up her get, now she does. The Gemara is going to say she needs evidence that she's divorced. So the way that Bate Dinim do it nowadays is they fold it over and they put like an X type shape cut in it. So it's cut for the fact that we know that it's been used, but it's still the fact that it exists is kind of like a receipt. I mean, it's evidence that the get was given. Or in the time of the Gemara, if it would have been ripped like that, we say, okay, it's ripped, so it's used, so you can't collect on it. So nowadays, as soon as the husband gives it to the wife, and or the now ex-wife, and she shows ownership over it, she gives it back to the Beis Din. The Beis Din reads it again to make sure it's the same get, and they say you're divorced. They make these rips in the get. Many, but they didn't have them just sign their name and address on the back to show that they were involved. And then the Beis Din sends each party a separate document signed by the Beis Din and sealed by the Beis Din that the get took place. So nowadays, for thousands of years already, at least 1,000 years, Beis Din hold on to all getting. The wife does not get to keep any get for at least 1,000 years already. So she gets a shover, the same word we've been using, saying that she did receive a get. So she has a Beis Din document saying that she did receive a get. But in those days, they didn't do that yet, in the time of a Gemara. So she would need her get to prove that she was divorced so that she could get remarried. And if you want to say that we have to tear up the get, she says we can't because I need to keep my get so I can get remarried. I have to bring evidence that I was divorced. So the Gemara says the Karina we have to say that when she collects the ksuba, we tear it because of agabe, but we write on the other side or on it gita denan kuriuhi la mishum de gita pasul. This get we tore, and it will be assigned by the Beis Din. The Beis Din put a rip in this get la mishum de gita pasul, not because it's pasul el delot hadav tigva beizimna achrina, but in order that she won't collect another time on it. So this Gemara here is saying that the Beis Din put a rip in it, but then write on the get that it's a valid get. You can let her remarry based on that, but we put a rip in to show that she already collected her ksuva and she can't collect on it. So I guess this is another way of saying to Rav that we don't write a shover, that we don't give a receipt to the heirs of her husband, but we write on her get that according to Rav, it will disallow her to use it, to exploit the system and use it another time to collect. Mishnah. Shnei gitu, shnei ksuva, go, if she comes with 2 gittin and 2 ksuvas. So obviously, this is a case where there's a ksuva that's dated, let's say, a ksuva dated 1993 or 1999 and a get 2003. And then another ksuva 2008, and a get 2011. So they had been married, divorced, and he remarried her, and then they got divorced again. So gova shtei ksuvos, she gets to collect both ksuvos because we say that for the first marriage he gave her a ksuva, and then when they got remarried, he wrote her another ksuva, and so he obligated himself to pay her for both marriages, so she gets for both divorces, so she gets the ksuva for each of the cases. Shtei ksuvos v'get echad. If she came with 2 ksuvos but only 1 get, o ksuvo shnei gittin, or 1 ksuva and 2 gittin, o ksuva v'get umisa, or she has 1 ksuva and instead of 2 divorces, they got divorced once, and the second time they didn't get divorced, but he died. So can't she get a ksuva for the first marriage and the second marriage? In these cases, no. Eino gova el ksuva achas. She only gets the payment of the ksuva once. Shamagarshas ishto v'chazira almanat ksuva rishon machzira. if he divorced his wife and they remarried and he didn't write another ksuva, he's still keeping whatever he wrote in the first ksuva. We saw this phrase earlier on Daf Pei Beis. Okay, Gemara, near the bottom of Pei Tes Amid Beis on 89b4. Ibay Bahai Gavya, Ibay Bahai Gavya, Lemet Havihufta, Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. So it seems that if she wants to collect with ksuva number 1, or if she wants to collect with ksuva number 2, she could collect both. So let's say that this will disprove a statement of Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. The Amar of Nachman Amar Shmuel, because Rav Nachman said the name of Shmuel. Shtei shtaros hayotzim ezachar zeh. If we have two documents that are dated after each other, but it seems to be the same obligation. Bitul sheni es harishon. The second one nullifies the first one. So since she has one ksuva, and then later she has another ksuva, so the second ksuva should nullify the first one according to Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. Now, lahavdil. Let me give an example. Someone a bunch of years ago, for an ad book, gave a donation to the shul from himself and his wife, and he also made it the same donation on behalf of his parents, who were very elderly. And it was his credit card. He was making it twice. So when I tried to put the thing through the credit card twice, it says it wouldn't let me because it's a duplicate payment. So what the credit card there did to protect the credit card, the person from fraud was the statement of Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel. And then the guy said, "Why did you only charge me once? You didn't understand what I wanted. I wanted you to charge me twice." I said I did, and I just have to wait a week because the credit card the machine isn't letting me do it. But that's Rav Nachman Shmuel. When you have this similar Reuven lent Shimon $100. Then a few months later, Reuven lent Shimon $100. The second, or $200. The second one is nullifying the first one. So here, when he has two ksuvas, how come we say she could collect both? So La Vidmar Allah, so Gemara says, no, we had a further elaboration on that statement. Amra Papa, motor of Nachman, the Osipa Dikla, Litosefes Kasfe. If he added a certain palm tree that he's obligating himself to pay, that wasn't in the first shtar, Litosefes Kavya. He did it to add on to the original one. Hachanami bid Osifla. So here too, he added something in the second ksuva. So that's why we see they're different. So it seems, according to this, Rashi doesn't say it explicitly. It could be that if she takes the first ksuva, we'll give her what's in the first ksuva, and she brings it, and when she brings the second ksuva, we're going to do the additional thing. Meaning, if he added on the palm tree, then it doesn't nullify the. So let's say the value of the first ksuva was $10,000. The second ksuva was $10,000 plus the palm tree. See, Rashi doesn't say this though, but so if she wants to say, okay, I'm mochel the first ksuva, we'll pay her everything in the second ksuva. If she only comes with the first, if she says, I only want to collect this first ksuva now, we'll give her what's only in the first ksuva. The Rashi doesn't say the rest. I would think, though, is that the second ksuva she'll only be able to collect the value of the palm tree. Or Rashi's saying she would never be able to collect the second one. So Rashi doesn't say the full. I'm not sure. Oh, so the way the ArtScroll explains the Rashi is that sometimes having an earlier ksuva is beneficial for her because let's say he sold a field in the meantime, she could collect it if the sale took place uh, after the first ksuva was written, but before the second one was written. So, and because he didn't mention the first field, she could either choose this one or that one. So, why would she choose to use the lesser ksuva? Because she might be able to collect from a field that the second one isn't collectible from. So let's say if someone sold a field in 2015 and then this ksuva is dated 2016, the ksuva cannot be collected from that field because he didn't own the field at the time of the ksuva. But if she has a ksuva from 2009 and she didn't sell the field to 2016, the guy who bought the field in 2016 should have bought title insurance. Now, I don't know what the how title insurance it would be helpful in these cases, and if someone sold a field and if it was already if there was a lien against that field from somewhere else, he'll know about it. But if it was already if the field was already had a lien from her ksuva from 2009 and then he bought in 2016 and then she brings a shot from 2009, the field was owed to her already, so she could collect from that field. Okay. We learned in the Brisa, Hotzia Geduk Ksuva Misa. So this is like the last case in the Mishnah. If she presented to us a get and a ksuva and witnesses that her husband died. So they were married twice. The first marriage ended in divorce. The second time they were married, the same husband, the same wife. The second time it ended with because the husband died. But she only has one ksuva. So in get kodem l'ksuva govish ksuvos. If the get was dated before the ksuva, she gets two ksuvos. One ksuva for the first marriage, and this ksuva is dated after the get. So the ksuva was clearly written for the second marriage. So there must have been a ksuva for the first marriage, and this ksuva that we have written must be a second ksuva. Ksuva kodemus leget eno gov el ksuva achas. But if the ksuva was dated before the get, so that's clearly back to the first marriage, and from the fact that she doesn't have a second ksuva shows that she only collects one ksuva, that which she brings, the value of that ksuva. Because if someone divorces his wife and then remarries her, he only remarries her to reuse the original ksuva. So since we have no evidence of a ksuva from the second marriage, the ksuva of the first marriage, because she never collected it, is what he is using, and she only collects that ksuva. She doesn't get that ksuva plus 100 zuz for the second marriage. Does that make sense? Mishnah. Katan shisiu aviv ksuvasa kayemet. Shavanas ken kima. So there was a katan. He wasn't bar mitzvah yet. His father made the shidduch for him, and when he became a gadol, they stayed married. So we say, so he wants it. So even though the father wasn't able to marry him off, but the fact that he didn't protest and he stayed with it shows that he must have made another new kedushin. So the ksuva that the father had written for him when he was a katan stays as a ksuva shamnas ken kima because he stayed married to her with the same intent that it started out with the same ksuva. Gershin iskara ishto imo. So if a husband and wife were married, they were not Jewish and they were already married, and then they converted together. Ksuvasa kayames. So her ksuva is kayames. So obviously, when they were not Jewish, they didn't have a ksuva. But we're talking about a case where the husband wrote her something similar to a ksuva, obligating her in some amount in case they get divorced. So when they get divorced, he doesn't have to write her a new ksuva. The ksuva that this contract that he wrote with her from before will still work. Shamanas ken kima. Because with the intent of keeping this obligation that he'd already obligated himself, that's why he's stayed married to her after their conversion. Because when they convert, they're new people. The fact that they were married when they were goyim doesn't mean anything. But from the fact they converted and so obviously so this happens in time. So Rav Elyashiv, so even though there's So there are cases when the family converts. So when the gerus takes place, the husband and wife need a new kedusha. They have to have a chuppah. Yeah, that still happens. I don't know how often it is.
I know minimum 2 cases personally.
You know, it definitely happens. A husband, the family isn't right. The family is not Jewish. The whole family converts. So right after the conversion, we make a wedding.
Someone was Jewish.
Yeah, yeah, that's also true. If one of the spouses was Jewish and then the other one converts, they also need a chuppah because they weren't halachically married before because one of them wasn't Jewish. So yeah, that happens also. Shamnas kima. Now the logic of this Mishnah would apply even in a case where, if the husband wasn't Jewish and he wrote some type of obligation to himself, that would you have to see what the Shulchan Aruch says on it. But yeah, Shulchan Aruch. Okay, Gemara. Amar Rav Huna lo shana ela mana masayim. Aval tosefes ein la. Rav Huna says the case, this is about the katan, that would only be true for the ikr ksuva, the 200 or the 100 zuz of the main part of the ksuva. But if the father had written for his minor son an additional amount, that additional amount does not stay in effect when the son becomes a gadol. Rav Yehuda Amar Afil Tosefes Yeshba, and Rav Yehuda says no. The Tosefes, the additional amount, does stay in effect, and it seems that we paskin like Rav Huna. Meisave, they ask against Rav Yehuda. Chidshu, no, tell us masha chidshu. If they added something to the ksuva after they converted or after the boy became a gadol, she gets to collect the additional amount that they made after the situation change. Chidshu in, lo chidshu lo. So that implies only if they added something, they would collect it. But if they didn't add anything, they wouldn't add any collection. So ema af masha chidshu. No, we can answer that question about Rav Yehuda, because it doesn't mean that she only would collect the additional amount. She could collect any previous Tosefes plus a new additional amount that they added. So let's say that the ksuva was 200 zuz, and they added 1,000 zuz, and then after the boy became a bar mitzvah, he says, "I'm giving you an extra 100." So 200 plus 1,000 plus 100 would be 1,300 altogether. So the question is, if he added amount, she gets to collect that 100. So she'll collect the 200 plus this extra 100. But the implication is she wouldn't collect that 1,000 that was the Tosefes of the original ksuva. So we said no, it's easy to push that up. She collects what the new amount plus any Tosefes that was on the previous star. V'halo tani hachi, but the Gemara says no, but the Brisa didn't say that. Chidshu no tos masha chidshu. Lo chidshu, because we only quoted you the first line of the brisa. Let's quote the rest of the brisa. Lo chidshu, but if he didn't add anything to the ksuva, besula gova masayim v'amana mana. A virgin will collect 200, and a widow will collect only 100. So we see that there's no Tosefes mentioned. So tifted Rav Yehuda. So it does disprove Rav Yehuda. So that's why we don't pass Rav Yehuda. The Gemara disproves it. Rav Yehuda masnis natise, but Rav Yehuda made mistake from a mistaken understanding of the Mishnah itself. Who savar ksuva kayamas akula milsakai. When it says that the ksuva stays in effect, he felt it meant the entire ksuva. Below it's not true. Ikr ksuva koi. It only meant the principle, the main part of the ksuva, the original 200 or 100, but not any tosefes. So the psak is, if a katan had written a ksuva and a tosefes, and then after his bar mitzvah he stayed married to her, and he offered her an addition, the original tosefes does not take effect, but he doesn't have to write a new ksuva. We were returning to you this 9th chapter of Kesuvos. So now, that's just Hashem, we're starting the 10th chapter, Daf Tzadi Amid Aleph in the middle of the page. If someone was married to 2 wives, umeis, but then he died, and both of them are still alive. But what happens? He doesn't have enough money to pay both of their ksuvos. His estate doesn't have enough money to pay the ksuba for Rachel, and it doesn't have to pay. So Yaakov was married to Leah and Rachel. Yaakov died, and his ksuba doesn't have enough money to pay both Rachel and Leah. So Harishona Kodemas Shnia, the one who he married first, takes precedence in collecting her ksuva. The Yorshe Harishona Kodmin Yorshe Shnia. And also the heirs of the first wife have precedence to the heirs of the second wife in case the first wife died before collecting and her heirs are collecting. And if the second wife also died, so the heirs of the first wife also have precedence over the heirs of the second wife. But it sounds like if the first wife died without collecting yet, so then the second one, she's still alive, it makes it sound like she would collect the ksuva, the second wife would collect the ksuva before the heirs of the first wife would. I don't know. Rashi doesn't say. He makes it sound like it's both cases died. If both wives died. It doesn't say what would happen the first if the first one died, the first wife died before she collected the suva. Does the second wife, because she herself was married, does she have precedence over the heirs? That doesn't say. Rashi doesn't talk about that. The article at the end of note 3 says that what I said is right. The Meiri and the Rashash say it that no, they say that even the heirs of this first wife would collect before the second wife herself because their obligation stems from an earlier thing. Okay. Nasser Shoshana Umesa, if he married his first wife and she died, Nasser Shnia Umesu, and then he married another wife and then he died. So Shnia v'Yorsheha Kodmin liYorshe Rishona. The second wife and her heirs take precedence to the heirs of the first wife. So this is talking about Kesuvos banim dichrin. So which we spoke about like 20 something blot ago or 30 something blot ago. So when she dies, he inherits her property. But male children that they have could collect some of the property. So in that case, so the second wife and her Yorsh and the Yorshim of the prunim of the take precedence of the banim dichrin, the male children of the first wife. All right, so that's a case where they're hurt, where I think that's a case where she had kids and he didn't, or they're not his kids, they're her kids, but the ksuva, if he added this part of the ksuva about ksuva's banim dichrin, they get something. I don't fully understand the Kesuvos banim dichrin. Gemara. From the fact that the Mishnah says that the first wife takes precedence over the second wife for getting the ksuva, Lok Tani Rishona Yesh Lavashnia Einla, and it didn't say that the Rishona gets a ksuva and the second one doesn't have a ksuva. Mechlal de Kadma Shnia V'Tafsa. That implies that what if somehow the second woman, Rachel, who got married second, somehow she sees property or belongings of her husband for ksuva. So it implies that if the second one, Rachel, because remember, Leah got married first to Yaakov, right? So Leah got married first. So Leah would get paid first. But if Rachel went and seized some of his stuff, lo mafkina mina, we don't take it away from her. Based in can't take it away from her. Shma mina, we can learn from here, from this wording of our Mishnah about chov me'ucher shakarim v'gava, if a later creditor somehow was able to collect before the earlier creditor. So Reuven borrowed money from Shimon in 2016. And then Reuven borrowed money from Levi in 2020. So who should get paid first? Assuming they were both equal term. I mean, if the first loan was for 10 years and the second loan was for 2 years, obviously you'd have to pay the two, and you had a principal and there was no problem. You would have to pay the 2 year loan off first, right? Because it was due first. But let's say it wasn't, then so he would have to pay the first loan back first. But we see that if the later loan, the guy collected, somehow he seized property from the guy he lent money to earlier, Masha Gava Gava. Whatever he collects, he collects. We don't force him to give it back to the first guy so that the earlier creditor gets paid back first. So the Gemara rejects this. So maybe Levi, who lent him money in 2020 later, but he sees some property, maybe he doesn't get to keep it. Umay Kodemis. So what does it mean that the Mishnah says that the first wife has priority? Legamri Ktani. It means that she has total priority, even if the second wife was able to collect some of his stuff. Beis Din would take it away from her and give it to Leah. Keditnan, as we learned in the Mishnah, Bein Kodem Labas. The son will get an inheritance before a daughter, and that's absolute priority. Even in that case, if the daughter would collect something, Beis Din would take it away from her and give it to the son. And that's because the halacha is that if there's a son, the daughter doesn't get any Yerusha at all midiraisa. When it says in this case kodemes, it means absolute. She has no claim. Even if she would seize something, we would take it away from her. So there's no proof. So we don't have any proof that if the second wife would seize some of her late husband's property, she would get to keep it. And even though if Rachel would seize the property, she doesn't get to keep it. Maybe it does have to go to Leah first. Leah's suba has to be paid off before Rachel could get any of hers. Ikeda Amri, some say that the discussion was from a different perspective. Midalok tani im kid mashniya v'tafsa ein motzin miyada. From the fact that the Mishnah doesn't say if Rachel, the second wife, was proactive and grabbed some of the property, we do not take it away from her. That implies that if the second wife, Rachel, took some of the husband Yaakov's property first, we do take it away from her, and we have to give it to Leah first. That teach us if the later creditor, the guy who lent him money in 2020, seized assets first, we make him give it back so that Levi, who lent him money in 2016, collects it first. So the Gemara says no. No, maybe Levi gets to keep the stuff that he seized. Because our Mishnah says that in the case where this first wife died and then then the husband died when she was married to a second wife, we said the second wife and her Yorshim take precedence to the heirs of the first wife. So in that case, even in that case, if the children of the first wife seize some of the assets, we would take it away from her, and we have to give the second wife and her heir or her heirs from his property. Taninami Rishona Gdemas Shniya. That's why the Mishnah said the Rishona is the Leah, the first wife, takes precedence. So it is absolute. Okay, Tzadi Amid Beis. Nasas Rishona. If he married his first wife and she died, and then he married the second wife and he died. Shmamina Tlos. We learned three things from this part of the Mishnah. Shmamina Achas B'chayev Achas B'moso. We learned that if one wife died while he was still alive, and then the other one died after he died. So it's this case. He was married to, let's put this, So Avram was married to Sarah, and then Sarah died, and then he married Keturah, and let's assume that Avram died before Keturah died. Right? Let's ignore the Mishnah that Hagar was Keturah, the Medrash. So Avram was married to Sarah. Sarah died. He remarried. He married Keturah, and let's say that he died and Keturah was still alive. That's the case of the Mishnah, right? I'm just using some names so we can make it a little bit less confusing. So Yesh lahem ksuvas banim dichrin. So Sarah's children have the rights of the ksuv of the male children. And we're not worried that they're going to be arguing about it with the second kids. Mimai, how do we know this? Because the Mishnah says that the second wife, Keturah, and her kids take precedence to the heirs of the first wife of Sarah's kids. Mikdam hu dekadmi. They have precedence. Ha'ika shakli, but if there's enough to pay for everyone, they all get. So he sees that if there's enough money, even Sarah's kids will get ksuvas banim different. Shmamina ksuva nasas mosul chaverta. We also see a second din that if there's extra from one ksuva, then you could pay with that extra to the second ksuva. Mimai, how do we know this? Im yesha moser dinner, because the Mishnah didn't say if there's any extra money after the first ksuvas is collected, then they get from the first. So we see that even if the estate can't pay for the whole first ksuva, but there is some money that we're able to pay to the person from the first to Sarah's kid. Ushmamina, and the third thing we learn is ksuvas banim dichrin lo tafra mimshabde. The ksuvas banim dichrin, you're not allowed to seize property that had been sold in the meantime. The isakadaytach tarfa mimshabde, because if we say that it could be taken from people that had sold it, leis behu b'nei rishona de litfri veishniya, then the kids of the first of marriage of Sarah's kids would be able to take the field away from Keturah's kids. From the fact that it doesn't work that way shows that the ksuvas banim dichrin is not cannot collect from property that changed hands even after the date of their obligation, because obviously Sarah's marriage was first, so the date of the obligation preceded the date of Keturah's kids getting, because he wasn't even married to Keturah back then. So we see that the ksuvas banim dichrin does not they're not able to collect from property that had left their father after the date of the ksuva. Ravashi asked on this, Mimai, how do we know that you learned this right? Maybe I could tell you achas b'chayav achas b'moso. So when one wife died when he was alive, so that's Sarah, and then achas b'moso, and then one died after he died, because Keturah, let's say that Abraham died while he was married to Keturah, and he died first. Maybe ein lahem ksuvas banim different. Maybe Sarah's kids don't get ksuvas banim different at all. My code, and what does it mean? What does the Mishnah mean when it says they have precedence? Lenachlok tani. It means they have precedence for Yerusha. Meaning, if he had kids, so Abraham had kids. Let's say it doesn't matter whether you had kids from Sarah or Keturah. What gets paid first, the Yerusha for the sons or the Ksuva? Maybe it means that the Ksuva of Keturah takes precedence to the Yerusha of his kids getting Yerusha. And if you say Sarah's kids, his heirs from Sarah, why does the Mishnah need to tell them at all? Since the Mishnah had to say the second wife, Keturah, and her heirs, in case she died before she was able to collect the ksuva from Avram's estate, Keturah's kids would collect her ksuva from Avram's estate because they are her yorshim, they are her heirs. So Tananam Yorshei Rishona. So the Mishnah, just for symmetry, it mentioned Yerusha of the first case but really there is no Yerusha of Banim Dichrin. It only mentioned it out of symmetry. So Ukta Ksuva Nasis Mosel Chaver. When it says that a Ksuva itself becomes extra payment and we could pay the second wife from part of the money from that's owed to the first wife. Dilma Olam Emelcha. Maybe I'll really tell you. Ein Ksuva Nasis Mosel Chaverta. A ksuva cannot, part of this, the first ksuva can't become extra to pay the second ksuva. Dinner, but here's a case where the estate was big enough that it paid the full first ksuva, but it didn't have enough to pay the second ksuva. But as long as it had enough to pay a little bit, even $1 of the second ksuva, so then it would pay the second ksuva. But if not, maybe the first one doesn't take precedence. Okay. We'll leave it here. So next week, I think we